Hey there, CS210 students. So on this recording, I'm going to walk through the details for Project 1 using a template that I'm providing you. So in Project 1, you're creating an application that manages a clock. And the clock has hours, minutes, and seconds in both 12-hour and 24-hour formats. So keep in mind, 12-hour formats have like an AM or a PM to them. 24-hour time, the hours go from 0 hours to up to 23 hours. So when we say 11 a.m., that's the same as 1100 hours. When we say something like 2 p.m., then that's really 1400 hours. So remember, there's a 12-hour gap after 11 o'clock, excuse me, after 12 o'clock when we go from the 12-hour time to the 24-hour time. So obviously you're watching the YouTube recording here. You are more than welcome to use my template that's attached to this, but no other templates. So that means if you find something on Chegg, Course Hero, GitHub, Discord, Reddit, etc., 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 you're not allowed to use that. Do not copy and paste somebody else's work. That means you are not learning. Okay, so if you scroll down here, here is the zipped folder. So you go ahead and download that, and then you can extract this. So I'm just going to copy it to the desktop. So this is a generic template. And I have my up and running here, the one that's currently open right here. This already has all of the code in it, but I'll come in here and I will open up the .sln. Now, if you are working on a Porto, then you would need to manually copy over stuff. It will be difficult to use my test. So that's why I don't recommend you to use the Aporto. It requires, it's just kind of a pain. So that's why you should have this installed on your local machine. So once you get it up and running, you can see in here, if you go to the header files, there is a clock.h file. So what we're going to do is we're going to define the functions that I want for the clock in a header file. So my clock has these methods right here. So if you're using my template, you don't need to change anything. This will work as is. These are all the methods that you need to utilize. And then if I go to the source files, you'll see that there's a clock CPP file. This is where we're going to implement the functionality of the clock header files. And then there's also a source.cpp file. So in here, this is going to include your main method. And then I also included the clock header for you here. You're definitely going to need to have some string usage, I think. If you don't, then you can just get rid of that import. But in here, this is where the main functionality is going to take place. So let's tie some things together here. So if you go to the Module 3 link, they do have a requirements and rubric here. So at a high level, they give you a flowchart showing what we're going to do. So you're going to follow this flowchart right here. And missing, where is it at? There's one other link in here. Here we go. So the functional requirements. So they give you the functional requirements, so we should display the clocks like this. I'm not going to be too concerned about displaying them in this format. I'm mainly concerned about the functionality, not the output display. Here's what the menu is going to look like. And then as we perform actions, so you can see they went from 3:22:01, so they added 1 second. You can see that they've incremented the seconds right there. Here's how it looks when it runs. So here's my actual implementation. So when it runs, I'm going to print out what the initial times are. So I've got mine starting out where I've got the time set to 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. So that would be in the morning. So that's AM. And if I add 1 second, then I add a second, which means everything increments there. So I've got 12 noon, 12 in the 24-hour clock as well. If I add a second again, you can see that it is properly adding a second. If I add an hour, I can properly add an hour and so forth. One thing that we should also include is input validation for integer choices. So 1 through 4 are the valid menu choices. So if I put in 5, that's not valid. If I put in 0, that's not valid. So only valid menu choices are handled. And if I put in a 4, then we exit the program, and you can see that it says goodbye. So again, that's how it kind of runs. Main menu displaying it like that's just fine. And again, the 12-hour and 24-hour clock format, this display would be just fine by me. So let's get into how the template is working here. So we've got methods defined in the clock.h file. And again, these are the only methods that you need to use for my template. And if I go to the project submission, they have some sense links here that give you some pseudocode that's going to match up with what I have. So for instance, they have format numbers as 2 digits. That's the same thing as this pad function right here. Output the time using 24-hour format. That is the get 24-hour format method here. Output time using 12-hour. That's get 12-hour format right here. Print out the menu. So if you go to the source.cpp file, that is the print menu method right here. Write a function that displays both 12-hour and 24-hour formats on the same interface. That would be right here, print clocks. Write the main function to control your program. Again, that's going to go right here. And then they've got a method called add second, add minute, add an hour. And again, I've got the same exact ideas here. Now, what's a little bit different, so they've got format number as 2 digits. So what's a little bit different here is they have this called 2-digit string. I'm calling it pad. The idea here is we want to check if an integer value is between 0 and 9. If that's the case, we need to append a 0 out in front of it. So for instance, we have 4 minutes right there on the clock. We wouldn't want to display that as 11:4. It needs to be 11:04. So this method needs to check if our value is between 0 and 9. If that's the case, then we need to concatenate a 0 with our value. Oh, by the way, so if this is the first method you're going to implement here, I go over to the clock.cpp file, and I can actually just hover over it here in Visual Studio. I can hover over it. I can create the definition of it in the CPP file, and I'm going to promote that. And great, it has provided me the method here. So these are hours, minutes, and seconds. So the clock.cpp file, we're going to have in here the hours, minutes, and seconds that the clock maintains. And I'm actually going to call these parameters H, M, and S. And this set time just simply sets these values right here. If I'm going to be implementing pad, so again, I'm going to hover over it, show potential fixes, create definition, and promote, boom. So this is going to be the implementation. So again, I have to check my int value coming in. So I'm just going to call it value. And what I want to do is concatenate a string representation. So if it's between 0 and 9, I need to concatenate a 0. Keep in mind in C++ to concatenate something, it has to be the same data types. So we need to use to_string. And clock.h should include string. So cross your fingers when I save this. I need to, let me do this. So I'll just put it down here. So this will work. This is not what you return. But to convert the integer value to a string, we have to use to_string. Is it making me want to do this? And there it is. So to concatenate the integer value with something that is a string, you have to use to_string like this. All right, so back here, so get suffix, this method, very simple. I just want to check if the hours should be AM or if they're PM. So just a simple if else check there. Again, the pad method, this is going to be very, very similar to what they talk about in here. We, again, just need to make sure that if it's between 0 and 9, we concatenate a 0 out in front. If we go to the get 24-hour format method, again, that's this get 24-hour format method here. They are passing in hours, minutes, and seconds. You don't need to do any of that because inside your clock.cpp file, you're going to have hours, minutes, and seconds inside here. So you're going to use these as the member variables of the clock. So when I come back here, you don't need to pass anything in. And all we want to do is return the hours, minutes, and seconds formatted just like this. So this is set, this pad method, or excuse me, the get 24-hour format method. All you're going to do is concatenate the hours, a colon, the minutes, a colon, a seconds, and keep in mind you'll have this pad method implemented. So you'll have to pad things appropriately, just like you have right here. The get 12-hour format. So again, you don't need any hours, minutes, and seconds because you already have access to them inside of the clock.cpp file. So what we want to do here is we want to return this format right here, where we've got the hours, the minutes, and the seconds. Again, pad appropriately. Now they're showing that the hours should be two places, but we don't have 05 on a standard clock here, so the hours shouldn't be padded here. But the minutes should be padded, the seconds should be padded, and then the AM and PM needs to be used. I just use the get suffix method right there because just a nice little method to get more practice writing methods. So again, you'll have to have some logic with this one right here to properly handle getting the hours for your time. Remember, 24-hour, the 12-hour format time, the hours could be ranging from 0 to 23. So if it's 1,500 hours, that's really 3 o'clock p.m. So you have to make sure you have the right logic to handle that properly. And then they also have some details on the add second, add minute, add an hour. So again, I have those right here. And let's take a look at add second. So the idea with this is we're going to add 1 second to our clock. And now ignore the get second and set second methods. You don't need to worry about these. In fact, get second, you already have access to the seconds in the clock.cpp file, so you don't need a getter for it, and you don't need a setter for it, again, because we have access to that variable. So the idea with this method right here is if the seconds are between 0 and 58, we can add one more. So we're going to add 1 second. Otherwise, if the seconds are 59, then we have to wrap around. So we can't add 1 second to 59. What we're going to do is set the seconds to 0 and then call add 1 minute. So just an if-else statement in there handling this logic right here. So when you come back here, add a minute's going to be very similar, except the difference is when you wrap around, you're going to call add 1 hour instead. And then add an hour, the little bit different thing here is we have to check if our hours are between 0 and 22. So if we're at 23 hours, we can't add 1 to it. We'd be at 24. What we would do is we would set it to 0, and that would be it. So again, we can walk through. We have these methods right here available to us with some ideas on how to implement them. And then in my template, we're going to implement those methods in the clock.cpp file. Now, when I go to the source.cpp file, I have access to those methods. I can add hour. Okay, so that is coming from the fact that we have included the clock.h file. So I have access to adding that hour. I can add a minute and so forth. I can get the 12-hour format time, I can get the 24-hour format time, and so forth. So all the methods that you've implemented are available in the main source file. So what do we want to do here? So again, let me get this thing up and running. So before this thing starts, I call the set time method, and don't know exactly why that closed. I must be in. Oh, I am. Hang on one second. I am in my template project. So let me go to the other one. Here we go. So let me run this one and pull up the source file. Okay, let me get the source file here, and I've got it up and running. So again, the idea here is we're going to set the time, so call the set time method. Again, you'll have access to that method. You can set it to whatever you want, 0, 0, 0. That's fine. And then we're going to follow the flow chart. So I want to display my clocks. I want to display the menu, and then we have to get the user choice. So I get the user choice, and then I handle the user choice based on 1 through 4 here. Also keep in mind that if we have an invalid input, we should display an error message. So again, we saw that earlier. So valid choices get handled, and if I do something like this where I have an invalid choice, we just simply display a little error message, and again, on 4, we exit out. So keep in mind that the application is constantly running, so these lines of code right here, this would be contained inside a loop. I would recommend that you use a do while loop because you definitely want to print the menu, get the user choice, and so forth prior to you definitely want those to happen at the beginning, regardless of what user choice is entered. So this all should be handled inside of a do while loop. Oh, by the way, I do provide a way for you to test your methods. So if you go to the test.project1 test down here, so you'll see that there is a test in here that tests the methods that you need to have functional. So it's got a set time method in here, and then I've got a get 12-hour format method. What I'm doing here is I'm going to check that when I start out, I get the correct value. So hours are 0 minutes, 0 seconds, 0, that I get 12 midnight. If I add an hour, add a minute, add a second, then it is working properly. You can see down here, I test some of the functionality of when I roll over. So when I add a second to 59, it doesn't go to 60, it goes to 59. It's going to roll this up to be 0 seconds, and then we add a minute to that. I also have checks for when we go from 1:59:59 times like 11:59:59. So the real edge cases are right here. When you add a second to right before noon, do you go to noon? And when you add a second to right before midnight, do you go to midnight? So to run the test, you right click the test, set as startup project, and just simply run it. You don't need to change anything in here. Let me click no. Let me figure out what my bug is in here. Didn't have a bug. I was running the template project where I don't have the values implemented. So now I'm going to run my real test. So here we go. So this actually has everything implemented, and when you run it, I would get all greens showing that I have implemented the clock functionality properly. So for instance, let's say that, you know, for whatever reason our code doesn't work. If our code doesn't work, it's not going to match a test. Now, I'm going to change this right here just so you can see that the test is going to fail. So I can see that the test is failing. I expected to get 12 midnight 01, okay, but I got actually 12:00:00. So I can start pinpointing, all right, what is not properly working. I could put a breakpoint in here. You can see that I'm going to save off the time to a variable, and I can Hover over it, just like we learned in the debugging chapter, debugging recording, I can see exactly what my value has. I could step into this method and see what's going on in my code. So again, don't change the test, but this would give you a chance to make sure that what you are getting is expected. All right, last comments. So if I pull up my announcement, so last comment here, your clock methods will not display any output or get any input from the console. So anything in clock.cpp, clock.h, this is not going to have any C out or C in. As I point out, the main method handles all of the input. Methods in the main source file, so in the main source.cpp file, that may handle input, handle output. We don't want to have any of it in the clock CPP or the clock header because now you've coupled it to a console application. We want this to be able to be reused by any type of application, console, GUI, so forth. So do not have any cout statements inside the clock implementation. Again, main method handles all the inputs. You should not have any integer literals for the menu choices. So when we print out that menu with choices 1 through 4, make sure those are constants. And then you are only referencing the constants. It makes the code more readable. Separate variables for the clock's 12-hour and 24-hour values will not be used. You're only going to use one variable for hours, minutes, and seconds, just like this. Otherwise, you're maintaining multiple variables, and it doesn't make any sense to do that. That kind of violates the dry principle. Don't repeat yourself. You don't need to have hours 12, hours 24, and so forth. You can just simply use these variables right here properly. And then again, I mentioned don't spend a lot of time on the output. I'm just mainly concerned that the functionality of the clock, so these methods right here need to be implemented properly. The display of the outputs, don't spend a lot of time on that. Just make sure it is very similar to the demo that I provided right here. Okay, once you're finished, you're going to zip up your entire Visual Studio project and send that to me. If you have questions along the way, don't hesitate to reach out.